pioneers in Alberta.
All right, are we ready? Okay, my name is Marissa. I am new to the commission. I started in July of 2024. Before that, I was 2 years a program coordinator for multiple subjects and education specialist with the County Office of Education in Merced. And then before that, I was 3 years as the associate director for teacher preparation with UC Merced. And before that, 17 years in the classroom, 5 of which were as a teacher of students with severe disabilities as a County Office of Ed representative. Then I spent about 8 years teaching English language development. And then I went into the library and got to wear frilly dresses and read lots of books to kindergartners and lead students through in a K-8 district through a lot of research techniques and stuff. And in that space, because I worked for a school district with 858 students, I was also an instructional coach in literacy initiatives and English language development. Educationally, just in case you were wondering, I'm a graduate of Merced College, which is a community college, CSU Stanislaus for my bachelor's credential, master's degree. Then I earned my doctorate at UC Davis in the Candel program. And my dissertation was critical race counter stories, testimonios and pláticas with Latina teachers in rural Central California, where I looked at the experience of women who did all their K-12 education in Merced County and came back and taught in Merced County what went right, what was challenging, and how can we replicate that for other programs to grow their own teachers. So that's a little bit of my background, my push in. When I started with UC Merced in 2019, I became the CalTPA coordinator, and I was like, oh my goodness, I never did this in my life, never touched a CalTPA. My multiple subjects credential in 2008, fantastic for me, missed the TPA. So I had to learn a lot about this. And because I have the single subject English, along with the multiple subjects, I actually became a scorer for CalTPA 2. And I really remember my scoring training for Pearson because it was the week before the pandemic hit in March of 2020. And so I was working with candidates, leading them through the teacher performance assessments through the pandemic as both student teachers and interns. So that's a little bit of my history. Just in case you were wondering why the heck I'm up here. I don't know why I'm here. There's something, but these are the folks that are in the performance assessment development team. We all work in different spaces. I work with the teacher performance assessments, and I also lead on the CalAPA, which I have a real quick slide on. This is what we're doing, model sponsor overview. I want to make sure that I quiet down and let you get some chance to dig in and answer any questions. Those are our different emblems. You'll see CalAPA, Ed Specialist, CalTPA, and the General Education CalTPA. I was an Ed Specialist. They're not regular ed and special ed, right? Because if the opposite or whatever, we're not irregular. General education, and general education includes single subject, world language, multiple subject, and TK3. That includes all 5 of the special education credentials. Quick slide, like I said, CalAPA, we're not talking about CalAPA today, but I just wanted to make sure that I did a quick, leadership cycle 1, 2, and 3. Folks complete those in a little bit of a different pathway where they investigate, plan, and reflect. To pursue an admin credential, you have to have 5 years of teaching experience. So these are a different group of folks that we're talking about, but I never want to dismiss that work. Okay, so some key elements of the CalTPA. It is credential and content specific. So there was conversation about, wow, these templates look the same. We're all single subject folks. And absolutely, but the way you engage students in higher order thinking in physical education is very different than the way you would do it in social science. But we engage candidates or engage kiddos in higher order thinking in both spaces. There are 2 instructional cycles. They measure different teacher performance expectations. Some of them do overlap, but each cycle measures different skills. So instead of putting too much stuff together, we try to break it up and make sure we're not overlapping and measuring the same thing in 2 different places. They're designed to be embedded in coursework and in clinical practice. As a TPA coordinator and faculty member myself, I used to have the candidates do the teacher performance assessment as an assignment in class, where they turned in templates and I gave them feedback and we talked through it and then they submitted. I watched their videos. I had conversations with them. I helped facilitate all those pieces. And there was a lot of good success, right? Because that's how it's intended to be done. It is an open book assessment, right? Nobody is saying you can't read the stuff. We know exactly the expectations because the rubrics are there. It is untimed. Unfortunately, for some folks, that go through the whole program, don't ever submit, end up on the other side. That's a concern, but it does allow for you as a person to say, you know what, I have this weekend. I can't work on it, but next weekend I have time and I can sit down and do it. So it is untimed, open book. Someone can work on it in their own space and time. There is a supported passing standard. Those passing standards are set by groups of educators who review different submissions, and it's a study that's done where we look at, where, somebody thinks, oh, they need to have 35 points on these rubrics, or they need to have 10, and so there's a conversation that goes between. And then the secondary passing standard is also available to folks. And candidates are supported by their cooperating teacher, faculty mentor, and a course instructor. So 3 folks that should be around that candidate, working with them to support them through this process. Please stop me if you have questions, because I know I will just keep going. So,
can I just ask about the prompts and the work that they have to is the same, whatever their subject is, but is the rubric the same?
The prompts are not the same. What's
the same then?
Here, so that's my little beautiful draft, but this is all the different credential areas that we offer CalTPAs. So a multiple subject candidate, single subject, and world language will all have different assessment guides, different prompts, different rubrics.
No, I mean within single subject.
Within single subject, yes.
They're all the same?
The rubrics are the same, and
it's
a content specific instead of saying history or math or science. We pull out world language because world language is a single subject area, but it's different because we're talking about language specific thesis. So yes, and the education specialists. So on this side of the table are what's operational right now, and that's what you have in your folder. And then on this side of the table is what's going to become operational next year. And what I have in this presentation are the changes for next year. We are actively editing all of these documents. There's a lot of editing, a lot of work to align with what is being asked of us in this space with the RDI TPA work group and the interim recommendations, and also what we have heard from the field, what we have heard when we talk to candidates, especially through our LPA field test. The candidates, we talked about, giving them lots of surveys. There are surveys, there are focus groups. We are meeting with coordinators, we're meeting with candidates, we're meeting with a lot of different folks around their experience with these field tests to ensure that we are getting at and measuring the tasks that we're asking, that we want to see, and really kind of winnowing down to the focus. So what is the essence of this assessment? What is the essence of this? What does it tell us? And what should we know? So that's a look at what's now and what's in your folder. I think the LPA documents are in the folder, but the cycle 1 edits that are going to change into the MPA math performance assessment for multiple subjects and all the ed specialist areas, those are in the works right now. So we didn't have that available to you, but I wanted to make sure that I gave you that information in this presentation. Does that answer? Or
it does. Just to follow up, because I'm still trying to get my head around it. So if we take single subject, all I know about is TPA. I don't think this at all. Within the science handbook and the science requirements, they have to use data and analyze data. They have to use data with their students in their classroom. Okay, and so they have to write up the data that they're using with their students and how they're doing it. In English, they're talking about complex text. In history, we're talking about use of evidence to back a theory of something that happened or whatever. So how do you make that difference in a single subject that has that's the same for all subjects? Where does that difference come around?
Sure. So in a single subject area, English was the one that I know, so we'll go with that. So every candidate is asked to choose a standard, right? So let's just talk cycle 1. What the purpose of that is planning instruction and differentiating. That's what we're measuring in cycle 1. So everybody chooses a standard that they're going to address.
Okay.
And
So it takes precedence over it all. That guides what that is telling you. You have to address this standard rather than the use of our standards, which are in the lesson plan, but that isn't driving their responses or what they teach. Okay.
Correct.
I get it now.
Single subject area, you would do your CalTPA in your methods course.
Right.
Or you would do it in a clinical practice space where you are working all in the same group of folks. Does that, okay.
Yeah, no, it does it, clarifies it.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Any other questions about this slide? Because this one makes me go, it's just a lot. And we do want to make sure that there is different. You don't want to just hand everybody the same thing as they teach it, right? You want to make sure that there are some very domain specific content. So that way, and also the A2 condition code, that is a major concern that we have addressed, is going to get resolved for a lot of these folks. Because right now, the candidates can take a general education multiple subject candidate. They have the choice to do CalTPA 1 in math or literacy, and CalTPA 2 math or literacy. So if they choose math for 1, they choose literacy for 2, vice versa, right? And what has happened, unfortunately, is someone would register for cycle 1 and choose literacy and then do all their stuff in math, turn it in, and it gets that condition code. So now they're getting a voucher and they're going to be able to resubmit and not have to pay. Before they would have had to pay. So thank you to the group for that recommendation, and it's moving forward.
Is somebody paying for the vouchers?
The voucher, I was gonna say, I don't refer that one back to our ES folks.
Like, I'm wondering, like,
Yeah.
you know, are the scorers or the Pearsons still getting the money that they would get for a resubmission, and the state of California is paying for these vouchers? Who's paying for the vouchers?
Pearson is paying for the vouchers
Okay,
at this moment.
okay, you know, so far.
Yeah. And again, the past 2 years, there has been a pile of money that folks have been using to submit performance assessments with. Unfortunately, when times are lean, things get swept. And so that is something that is unfortunate right now. Any other questions about this slide or anything else I can
I have
address?
a follow-up question,
Sure.
Pearson. Do you anticipate then Pearson increasing initial costs to kind of absorb that impact?
We're not sure yet. We're looking at ways that we can help the candidates, so that's why we pushed this out as soon as we could. But we're looking at different ways we can get. The goal is to stop help the candidates not submit in the wrong area. So we're investigating that piece to see how we can support programs and support candidates so they're not submitting in the wrong area. So that's the main thing, especially A2. But as Marissa said, some of that's going to go away.
Yeah, and one thing I used to do when I was working with PC Merced is whenever we admit a new cohort of candidates, 35, 40 candidates, I met with each one of them myself for 30 minutes, and I went over their course of study. And on that course of study, it said, when you register for CalTPA, because you are seeking a single subject English credential, here's what you choose. And then we had the class and I said, okay, everybody be ready. We're registering for the test together. We're going to do this together. And I'd walk around and make sure that they all registered. We didn't have that issue when we did that. And so that might be a recommendation that programs support candidates in that way, because many times credentialing is a very different set of skills than is teaching. And the making sure that we check the right boxes, unfortunately, gets in the way of things. So we just want to make sure that we are supporting folks in doing that. And I recognize that I was in a much smaller program and that there are a lot larger programs out there, and that will take support, but it could look different in every space. I was only working with like 75 or so at a time. Okay, so this naming thing, This has been a bit of a challenge. So I just wanted to make sure PK3 and MS candidates, they're learning about students and planning a math lesson. This is what's coming next year. So they will know it's math. The ed sped, right? They learn about students with an IP and plan a math lesson, and they learn about students and plan instruction, right? Single subjects. You're going to plan your domain specific area. So that way it's very focused about what we're looking for. So some key elements of cycle 1, the lesson frame is always asset-based, UDL-focused lesson planning, leveraging, using those cultural and linguistic assets and interests. 2 instructional cycles, right? And you'll see math and content specific here because math is for those general education and special education credentials. Content specific is single subject world language. So 1 focusing on related academic language development. One of the biggest condition codes, even Adam said earlier, was that candidates are struggling to cite ELD standards. Oftentimes they do cycle 1 early in their program. They may not have had a lot of instruction about how to, and ELD standards are challenging to read. It's a challenging text. So we have removed ELD from cycle 1 and put it fully into cycle 2 for all candidates. Typically, candidates do cycle 2 after cycle 1, but we are not leaving out language, right? Language is important. How to talk like a scientist is very important. So we're focusing on related academic language going forward and ELD in cycle 2. And that also lines up with SB 488. That requires that ELD be addressed in the literacy performance assessment. And so we're trying to align all our cycle 2s together and our cycle 1s. Active engagement of students, right? Kids are actively engaged. I tell the candidates, if you want to fail this, give them a worksheet. Have them sit quietly at a desk, right? It should sound like a construction zone. Kids should be moving, doing stuff. Actively engaged, and we're trying to get away from candidates, like I said, making copies and giving kids worksheets as 3-year-olds sit with little scissors and try to cut stuff. We don't want to see any of that. Also, there are focus students in cycle 1. They are meant to be representative of different students you'll see in a classroom, kids with special education or learning needs, students who are English learners, and there's a huge group of students with well-being needs, social, emotional. They need to feel safe in their spaces, and until we feel safe, we can't learn. So this is intentional planning for focus students in a classroom. So how are we supporting these kiddos?
So if a candidate didn't mention an ELD standard
In cycle 1?
in cycle 1, then that would have got a condition code,
Correct.
even if they'd have been talking about it in the lesson plans.
Oh, no. If they would have talked about it in the lesson plans and they would have had a goal for it, then yes, it would have been just fine.
All right.
We can have this one piece of evidence does not negate something else being absent. But if they just said, I'm teaching this lesson and there's no ELD in it, that's a condition code. And that's the concern because before it was measuring their ability to teach English language development. And so the condition code is assigned when we can't score it, or they just score a fail on it. And so that's kind of the issue.
A condition code and not a fail.
Because and there's a lot of theory behind some of this piece, rather than saying you failed, right? It's this is what you need to fix and go forward. Unfortunately, because it costs money either way, right? It's not as, but the big thing is that we didn't want to have these, it's enough rubrics as it is, but if you pick every little piece out and put it in a rubric, you're going to look at 10, 12 rubrics, and that's a whole lot. Right. And so we didn't necessarily put some things into rubrics that were condition codes. But now moving forward, we are looking at where we are double testing things, right? Because cycle 2 did not have a requirement for ELD before. It was in cycle 1. But then we recognize here's the issue. Maybe this is their first 6 weeks in the program. They don't know how to read this stuff. They're taking the class that's ELD and this at the same time. So they're, it's a challenge. So we want to move it further in the more challenging stuff because we always get better scores on cycle 2. It's a more complex cycle, but I think it's because they've built on it, right? So trying not to double test things and then trying to minimize how many constructs are in a rubric. When you see a rubric, it has 6 or 8 constructs in it. Like, that's so overwhelming and so difficult to look at. And so that's what the condition codes were originally in there for content. Also, the condition codes were technical. Your video, we can't play it, all those pieces, right? And so some of these other condition codes that have snuck in, we are working actively to eliminate them, put them into rubrics, which will make more candidates fail. Unfortunately, if they don't, if they.
Make candidates aware of what they're supposed to do.
Absolutely too. More candidates would potentially fail, but the reason why is because you did not address a major component of this assessment. And that's, I mean, that's the reality of it, so.
Sorry, this may be like
No.
beyond the scope and I just don't know anything. I'm curious how we measure active engagement. And also I'm curious, how do we identify social, emotional, or well-being needs?
So active engagement looks different in every single domain. So if you're looking at PK3, right, what does active engagement look like for little guys sitting at a table counting bears? What does it look like when we are putting our hands inside of a box and describing how something feels and then someone has to guess what shape we have? Right, that's active engagement, hands-on learning. We have domain-specific experts, focus groups, people that we are working with that help us with these definitions.
Finding it?
We
Okay.
provide these definitions to our assessors. Again, an assessor is not just someone off the street. You have to have that credential. You have to have that experience. And there's a lot of pre-work that they do before they go in and assess. But they are you and me. We are experienced educators looking at this, seeing what the candidate can define. And active engagement in PE is going to look very different than active engagement in an art class. And so we make sure to have those domain-specific definitions and assessors to understand that. Does that answer that one?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
thinking, I'm just still gonna think it through.
Sure. And the second part, I'm sorry.
How do we identify if a student has social, emotional, or well-being needs?
So we leave that to the candidate. Sometimes they don't necessarily have to have social emotional needs. My apologies. They could also have other academic needs. So we saw a lot of this. Kid was absent for 18 months during the pandemic, came back to school, needed to start over again. That's a focus student. One focus student that I had, just as a teacher myself, had a kid that was in gangs and had a lot of issues with sitting with the door to his back. So I need to make sure that I sit him in a space where he doesn't have to constantly be going like this. Right? So that's an emotional need. That's a social emotional need. Maybe we have children going through a very angry divorce at home. They need a safe space at school. How are we providing that? What are we doing to be loving, to be very conscious of a student whose mother just died? That kid is not going to be sitting in the classroom making Mother's Day cards with everybody else, right? So those are things that we think about. We don't very clearly define it. We have in the past made this like exhaustive list of different things, but again, we leave that as a point of choice to the candidate to say, this is the group of students. This guy catches my attention. This is something that he was doing this yesterday. This is not him. This is not who this kid has been. Came to school all of a sudden, 2 weeks now, just they were happy go and now oh what we found out something happened with mom or dad or so. That's that person for the kid, the candidate. And it really comes from knowing your class, knowing the kids. And unfortunately, student teachers are in there, right, really quick, but they should be spending at least 3 to 5 weeks and have a cooperating teacher spend some time with them before they assign these focus students.
So it's up to the candidate and then they defend their selection of that student?
And then make reasonable adjustments, right? You have a kiddo in your class that is struggling because, let's say they just arrived in the United States and they are dealing with a lot of trauma that they bring with them. And so we're going to purposefully partner them with another student who speaks their home language and is kind and patient and will sit next to them and be a friend. That's an adaptation to what you're doing. And it's something that takes some forethought to make sure that we are supporting that kiddo. We're not going to call on them to read out loud, right? Because they struggle with that. So just that kind of thought. Is that?
Yeah.
So I worked with a couple districts who are really having a hard time finding enough educational specialists. Could you just give us general thoughts about how cycle 1 and cycle 2, and maybe you have a slide about this, how district interns are really kind of engaging with this process?
Absolutely. I was leading cycle 1 and cycle 2 for district interns for the past 2 years. And so I worked with them very, very closely in this. And yes, what is the number? Somewhere 76% of special education teachers come through the intern pathway. So it is a challenging way. And so what I did is, again, embedded this in class coursework. They didn't have to do extra observations in addition to the 12 that they were doing for me. They took this as one. When we did their feedback around the observation, it was all targeted at what they were doing to meet their CalTPA. And also in embedding it into a coursework, it didn't make it an extra thing. I also would have Saturdays where I would meet with folks either in person or via Zoom, and even just holding work time for folks to come together, because oftentimes working, doing a class after a full day of work, that stinks. And Saturdays sometimes are the best time for interns to meet. And so I would shift my schedule to make it so we'd come into a room like this and everybody's doing something just a little bit different, but I know what they're doing because I'm the one going around and observing them, or one of my mentors are doing that, and we are all having conversations weekly to know how people are doing.
Do you feel like any of these elements were particularly more challenging for district interns? Because not only are they walking in with the same amount of knowledge as traditional students, but also without the mentor teacher in the classroom. Is there anything here that we really need to start thinking about as we make recommendations, knowing that district interns will be impacted by them?
So the passage rates for district interns in special education are actually a lot higher than it is, because they are the teacher of record. They do spend a lot of time with these kiddos. They know their IEPs, right? And so they're able to do those pieces. If you look at the passage rates for special education, like I said, they're much higher than they are in the general education side. And I would say the biggest thing is to chunk things for people, to help them backwards map. One thing I used to do with candidates is have them draw a picture of them when they cross the finish line. What are you gonna do? How are you gonna look? What's your face gonna be like? Let's make a celebration picture, and then what do we have to do to get there? And let's map it out. And teachers love doing that, color coding, mapping things. I'm going to do this by this date and making this beautiful plan. Whether we stick to it or not is always a challenge, right? Because, by this date, I will lose 60 pounds. Not how that kind of works. But by doing that, helping them visualize it, me keeping it to keep me accountable when I would send out my weekly TPE of the week. Hey guys, this is what we're talking about this week. And I used to do this as a coordinator where I would send out a mass email to everybody every other week. Everybody okay? You good? You good? People would ignore that. So I used to take the time and send out individual emails to my candidates. Say, how you doing? I would get a lot more communication from folks by doing that, by checking in regularly on folks. And then, like I said, I would always make a point, even if I wasn't their mentor, of going and seeing them as much as I could in their classroom as a coordinator for intern programs. I really enjoyed coordinating intern programs. I loved UC, absolutely loved UC, but I had a lot more flexibility with the County Office of Ed to be able to be in person and to go see the candidates. So I would say that interns definitely need a lot of love. They need a lot of support, and they also need for these pieces to allow for other stuff to get taken out and use what's here to be able to do what we needed to do.
Since we're talking about interns, did the school districts give the interns time to put their assessments together, like substitute teachers in their classroom?
No, and that's always been a challenge because we can't develop an MOU that allocates where they will put their money.
You say, if you're gonna hire, can we say, if you're gonna hire a district intern, you are required, like all industries, for candidates who are studying for exams, they get paid time off to do that.
That would absolutely be a tremendous recommendation.
And it's in the preconditions, isn't it, for intern programs?
What?
Yeah, are there other requirements for employers of interns specific to their employment?
I don't know.
We can verify that. I'm not remembering any preconditions or anything that says that you must give people time to do certain things, but they did have
An
to.
employment
Yeah,
issue.
there were like in things in the MOU that said that if you have to have 2 placements, that they had to help provide that, like an education specialist who's seeking a mild, moderate support needs credential always also has to have experience with extensive support needs, home health, all those different spaces. And so, and in the PK3 credential, right? If someone, they have to have 200 hours in one placement than another, and then another 200 hours of choice.
Right, there
So
are.
there is
requirements.
precedent.
There's mentors that are required with specific kinds of expertise, and they have to be working with them X number of hours and all of those sort of things.
144 support hours per year, 45 specific to EL.
Again, you're gonna become trader on Wall Street, and you've got to pass your licensure exams, your firm pays for you. Stay home and study.
No, absolutely, and that would be tremendously helpful. Anything else on this one? Okay. So this is kind of just a table breakdown of what's in step 1. Like I said, you're providing contextual information. This is you getting to know the students. You choose 3 focus students. You will identify them as FS1, FS2, FS3. Nowhere in the video do you say, this one right here, this is the one that's my focus student 1. They're not required to do that in any way. And also in the education specialist models, candidates, with the exception of mild, moderate support needs, candidates are able to film with just 1 student. Because oftentimes as an education specialist, you're working one-on-one with kiddos, but the mild, moderate support needs credential is more alike to the general education credential or a co-teaching model. So you would most likely have at least 3 students, 2 or more is what a class is made up of. So a candidate who is teaching TK can pull a little group and film with just 3 kiddos. And that meets the requirement for this. Plan a single lesson, give the rationale. So what are you going to do and why? Then describe the resources. I often tell candidates to use Google Slides or something of that nature. Remember stuff, PDF it, upload it that way. Then they're going to video record, because again, cycle 1 is 1 lesson. They're going to video record the whole lesson, and they're going to submit up to 3 clips. Now, right now, it's 3 clips, 5 minutes or less. It will be adjusting to 1 to 3 clips, and they can choose the length, but no more than 15 minutes. And they have to show active math or content-specific learning, active academic math or academic language. So how they're teaching the how they're teaching the content-specific learning, how they're teaching the content-specific academic language, and how they're monitoring student learning.
So you have a 15-minute maximum. Do they also have a minimum of what video they submit?
No.
The TikTok.
Yeah.
Yes, like 20 seconds.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you have an AI policy for step 3?
We have no AI policies at the commission. We defer to programs to monitor AI at this time.
I have a quick question. I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding clearly. So here it says, like, if a multiple subject candidate is engaged in cycle 1, does it have to be math? I know you said earlier they could choose.
Right.
But now in the new version, because of the literacy work. Okay, so for cycle 1, it will be math.
Yes, that's why we're saying that A2 thing
Yeah.
will go away for a whole lot of folks. It will be a single subject world language problem,
Mhm.
and we will most definitely be addressing it via multiple ways. So, yes.
You may come to this as we get to cycle 2, so feel free to, not answer it now. But I also wonder the implications of math being cycle 1, or like whatever the content area. Anytime there's a cycle 1, you would imagine that candidates are not going to be as strong teaching that content area in December or November as they will be by the end of the year. So maybe that's okay. Like maybe it's sort of like they're going to get some feedback and they'll get better. But I do wonder about sort of math being the one that's the cycle 1, and not to say that literacy isn't really important, because it absolutely is, but just kind of wondering about that.
Right, and one of the things that you are bringing up is something that we are working, taking out cycle 1 and just calling it the math performance assessment and the literacy performance assessment, because even just that in your mind thinks, oh, well, you have to do them in order. 1 and 2, right? And we get that question all the time. And when I would have a candidate in my program at UC Merced, because we started every semester. We took a new cohort every fall and every spring.
Uh-huh.
If I had a spring start candidate, we'd do cycle 2 first,
Oh, I see.
right? Because that's the kind of work that we would do, and then we do cycle 1. It didn't, and candidates were like, wait, 1, then 2. No, we're gonna do, because I offer these classes, we're supporting people in this way, and then we'd start.
So they don't necessarily build.
Not necessarily, they test different things, but if you do cycle 1 first, right, you'll have seen the format and it's a little bit more, yeah. But typically, folks do cycle 1, then cycle 2. But it's not always that way. And that's one of the things about programs. They know their context, they know their candidates. They can choose to offer these in whatever way works for the people in front of them. Oftentimes, cycle 1 in the spring could be challenging. There is, in my area, the kids get a week off in February, then they get spring break, and then spring break's gone and the kids are kind of checked out, right? It's hard to do some of it. So sometimes that time of learning between like Labor Day and Thanksgiving is a really good chunk of time to do 3 to 5 lessons in a series. That might be a good space for a cycle 2. It just really depends on the context, the candidate's preferences, and what courses they are enrolled in. And so allowing for programs to manage that, I think, is a really good thing.
So they could take it at any time.
Absolutely.
So in January, so you might not do cycle 1 until January, and then in March do cycle 2, or vice versa, whichever way around.
Do it in whatever.
Whenever you
You
want.
could do it in 1 semester, like if you want to kill yourself a little bit, or you could spread them out however you like. An ed specialist, when I had 2 to 3 year intern programs, we'd do cycle 1 in their, at the end of their first year, and then start up with cycle 2, because everybody's energized in the fall. By about the spring, we're about ready to lay down, take a nap. So that's not when I would kill them with cycle 2. Yes.
So to circle back to what you were saying earlier about emergent bilingual students and the EL standards, there's a world where even though it was pushed to cycle 2, it could still be done first, which might defeat the purpose of pushing it to cycle 2.
So the push to cycle 2 was not only in addressing that content condition code, it was out of statute from SB 488 that requires it. And what we tried to do is align it.
Yeah.
And what we pushed it to cycle 2 because it was in cycle 2 if the candidate chose. So the candidate can say, I don't have any English learners in my class, so I'm just going to plan for related academic language. That's in cycle 2. And then in cycle 1, it was a must plan for English learners, right? So what we tried to do was align it to cycle 1 in everybody's doing related academic language, and cycle 2, everybody's doing ELD. If I would assume that if a program is supporting a candidate through cycle 2, they would know there is ELD in that, and we need to make sure we talk about it. And I highly recommend program coordinators set aside a lot of time and make no assumptions that anybody knows anything about any of the standards and very explicitly teach them.
Thank you, that was a good clarification.
That's a question about step 4, the apply. Is that just a written response?
So the candidate can either write or they can record themselves speaking. I think they can do 5 to 7 minutes of video. What we don't like to see is when somebody writes it out and just reads it, right? It could be somebody ask you, you could sit with a candidate and ask them the question and they could respond in their own words. So they do have multiple ways of expressing that.
Mm-hmm.
It's another choice point, and it is in the operational one now, and it definitely is. The commentary is also something that he can record. So it's not just.
And is there a lot of guidance about what active learning means?
Absolutely, there's a definition in the glossary for all of these terms that we have, so that way we're all speaking the same language. But as you well know, what we say and what someone understands can be 2 different things. So that's up to the faculty member to ensure that their candidates understand that. And so in a domain-specific space, you're an education specialist teaching teachers who are working with students with extensive support needs. What does higher order thinking look like? What does all these pieces look like in that space? They can help define that as well. Good. So this is a picture, and we will make this, I'll send this over to Juliet so she can shoot it out. This is what the candidate sees. This is evidence table. So this is what they're going to do, and this is what they're going to turn in. And this is for the math performance assessment that's coming up for multiple subject, K3, and education specialist candidates. So what you have in the Google folder is what's operational now. And what you could do is look at this and see what's going to be different. And you'll notice there's a whole lot more in there now that we are pulling out, spreading around, and really looking at this and saying, what is the essence of this thing? What do we want folks to show? This is the same overview. And again, single subject and world language are two separate. I think this is just, no, because the assessment guide, when they talk about single subject and world language, the biggest difference is in the rubrics for world language, because they talk about like a fatal flaw of a world language is if they just teach in English, the whole thing. Like, how are we measuring your ability to be a Spanish teacher if it's all in English? So there is a lot of information in the rubrics that has to do with the domain specific language, but the evidence table is the same for both. Are you confused, Reggie? Did I say something wrong?
No.
Get this lady out of here. Okay, so instructional cycle 2, this one has a little bit more to it because these are the two groups that there's 7 different versions of the literacy performance assessment, PK3, multiple subject, and the 5 education specialist areas. Single subject and world language candidates are accountable to TPE 7, right? But they're not assessed in the same way. So we tried to align cycle 2 to cycle 2, so that way it was more alike than different, but there are some very specific differences for a single subject teacher, right, than there are for a person that's teaching someone how to read.
So will there be any changes to single subject world language?
Absolutely.
CalTPA as a result of the literacy?
Absolutely. So some key elements, right? This one meets the requirements of SB 488. We're always focused from an asset-based, UDL-focused lesson planning. That's leveraging students' assets and thinking about cultural, linguistic, and interests. The ELA ELD framework is a foundation of this assessment. And the students will write ELA literacy and ELD goals. So what we're going to learn about and how we're going to communicate about it, right? And it's assessment-driven instruction. So I do this, I give out this assessment to kiddos, I get this response back, and I make an instructional decision about what comes next. So that's the big focus of this. And then follow-up instruction. Now I gave these assessments, what do I do next, right? So we're trying to make sure that candidates understand that students drive instruction, and we can't just talk and assume they all know it and then move on to the next page.
I'm so sorry, because Brent has now put AI in my head. If this feels like an absolute digression, and I'm thinking about like ethics and like integrity, and also like how educators share, for example, lesson plans. There's a ton of great nonprofits right now that are pairing really beautiful lesson plans with ELD and ELA framework standards.
Absolutely.
And it's my understanding that that's completely acceptable.
Perfectly acceptable, as long as you cite it.
Right.
Because a lot of times candidates come from a district and they say, here's your curriculum, this is what you're going to use.
Right.
And as long as you say, this is what I'm using because of this, perfect.
Okay, and that falls within the ethical standards of like the spirit of this.
Absolutely.
Okay, because I thought that, but then like, whatever, you should ask.
In my mind, always, you just gotta think of your conscience. Let your conscience be your guide. Is this something that's good? Is this something that's right? Does this help the candidate? Is this my work or is it their work? Right? And if you're answering those questions, yes, this is helpful to the candidate. Yes, this is their work. Then these are all acceptable things to do.
It's nice to hear from the people in charge.
Probably like to add to that, then in designing the assessments, the next iteration, we really have to ask ourselves, what is the assessment? How is the assessment providing opportunities for the candidates to authentically demonstrate that they know what to do with kids in classrooms? Now, teaching is going to change with the input of AI. And yes, but they've always had lots of resources to draw from for designing lessons and all of those sorts of things. But we will have people who are, or we will have machines analyzing, we already do, analyzing assessment data, even in a classroom assessment and saying, here's the results. So if that's what teaching is, then that should be adequate for what we're doing here too, as long as a candidate then it knows what to do with it. So it comes down to what's the role of the teacher, and are we preparing people to be in that role? And are they able to demonstrate that they can do that role? And it's just
Absolutely.
very
And
complicated.
And it is extremely complicated, and then throw in legislation and requirements of literacy in California, and so
Yeah,
it
but
is
I-
not a simple thing to do.
It isn't, but I guess I would move a little bit away from, ethics, are you cheating? To really designing an assessment that is authentic. We talk about this all the time. It's authentic and it allows people to learn, and it allows them to demonstrate they can do what they're doing.
No, absolutely, and that's what a lot of this is about, for you all to take a look and see these. You can look at the LPA and check and see if the tasks that we're asking folks to do, because they're to plan. They choose one focus student. They have to include foundational skills. That's part of SB 488. Every lesson has to include an element of foundational skills. Then they also choose an additional theme, meaning making effective expression, language development, content knowledge to integrate with that. Then they choose their formative assessments, their summative assessments, and then they have a rubric. And how are they going to deliver this in 3 to 5 lessons? The videos that we ask for are them demonstrating their competence with teaching foundational reading skills, the additional theme, the assessment of literacy, and how they're adjusting their literacy instruction. Then they provide that commentary to it. They do it, and then they tell us why they chose those things, and how is that, in a line, in order. Yeah.
So this also makes me think too about one of the critical pieces when I was a teacher ed director, was that whatever the candidates were doing in the classroom was not separate from what they were supposed to be doing as a teacher in that classroom and teaching the curriculum in sequence as it was. It was not okay for them to come in and say, I'm going to teach these 3 to 5 lessons on X when the students are doing Y, for that next month. And I think that's a way of ensuring, I think we go on right now and get 3 to 5 lessons with all of these sorts of things in them. That would have nothing to do with what the kids in the classroom are doing at that point in time. So that's one way perhaps to strengthen and say it has to be aligned with what's happening right now.
So I think to follow up on that, and I think this is more for the table and not a critique of your work at all. You're doing great. I would buy sand from you in the Mojave. It's okay. So I'm Carol. So I think my concern then is because a lot of what we can do on paper is very replicable.
Mhm.
The intimacy and the authenticity comes from our interaction with students. We don't currently have an AI policy that protects the student data that we're collecting in any meaningful way. And so the thing that AI would have to write is your reflection and working around with your interactions with your students, who, even if they're S1, S2, S3, that's still data from minors.
Mhm.
So Berkeley published something, but we have no rule that says that National University needs a policy on this. And so National University can decide kind of how they want to protect themselves from lawsuits if and when that becomes a case. And I'm sorry, National Review, maybe it's not against you, but does that make sense? And so my thinking right now is we have something that does ask people to really look at the students in front of them and think about their students and serve them. And we're, as a person in a classroom with students, what are we doing to protect them? And I guess anonymity is a layer of protection. But if you're the only young person of color whose mother has died in a small town,
Right.
and there's only that's the kid in the paperwork. So I know that's being kind of whoa.
Well, that's why we have a lot of protections around the e-portfolio system, where they are uploaded in a password protected space.
But if
Videos
I'm
are not
ChatGPT
published.
to create there's no rule against that, is that correct? Because if the university doesn't have a rule, I know we're
Right.
there.
Again, like I said, we have to defer to programs because we are the model sponsor providing these resources to folks. How they put them into play is going to look very different from, somewhere in Eureka than San Diego, than Merced, than Santa Barbara. Everywhere has a different context. Every program has a different emphasis. People are different. The way you would teach something is everything's a little bit different.
There are no guidelines around anonymizing.
Absolutely, there are.
I mean, aren't there any guidelines? Are there any, like, you have to have, consent? I mean,
Absolutely.
the
They
program sponsor does that or does not provide that?
These are built into the assessment guides. You do have to have permission to film. They do not call anybody by any name other than like a first name,
I mean,
things of that.
it doesn't seem very different than saying, and if your candidates use AI, they must blah, 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 blah. It seemed like there could be a possibility to provide some guidance to programs around what's acceptable to protect the students.
And that's something to potentially add to
Yeah.
what's going on with acceptable supports and a recommendation to be made. But at this time, we don't have
Yeah.
anything in place for AI. And
Right.
so, and that's always, it's something we think about a lot. Trust me, I do. I really do because, and sometimes you can see patterns like how ChatGPT does this, and this, right? It's always these like certain kind of sentences and you see them and you're like, but we don't know. We don't know if that person used ChatGPT or if that's just the way they write. And there's no way that now puts me in a place where I'm making a judgment. And I don't think that that's a good space because we want to find evidence to score these things.
I think we're just wondering about.
How to keep students safe as we move forward using
Yeah.
something that's ubiquitous.
The
Sorry.
districts,
Yeah.
the districts require that. It's not even, the programs require, but nobody can go into a district and teach, no student teachers, without having signed documents, the program signing documents saying that they are going to keep students safe. They can't, their images can't be used anywhere, their information can't be used anywhere.
Right, and I had a candidate once who was in a district where the families did not want their students to participate in his CalTPA. So I had to go and have a meeting with him with parents in the evening, and some signed a permission slip and some did not. And so the kids that did not sign permission slip were behind the camera. The kids that did were facing away from the camera because they just have to be in the screen. They don't have to show their faces. We just have to see there's kids there because we don't want someone teaching a very empty open room. And that's the concern. Yeah.
This is, when we talk about this, I think we all of us on this group do have to really understand this because this is the kind of information, like I remember when TPA first came out, we spent years with people saying this is unsafe for kids when in fact these processes and safety nets were in place. So we just have to be sure we all understand.
Yes.
Okay.
So let me ask you a question about the slide before, which I was interested in.
This one or this one?
I can't remember. Prior to this one, where we said about that it's assessment-driven instruction. Are you asking them to be very specific about an assessment that has happened and then teach something and then give another assessment?
So in the LPA, there is a requirement for some type of a screener to see where kiddos are, right?
Okay.
And so, but with single subjects, we look at what you have seen them do.
Oh, so just respond to a prompt in a sense.
Right, yeah.
I've seen you do this, this, and this in the past, but it's not actually an assessment.
And even if you talk to your cooperating teacher and I walked into this unit and this is what they've done, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for them to start from a place of knowledge and move the students forward. There are different requirements in the literacy performance assessment than there are in the single subject world language world, but those are all outlined in SB 488. Okay, so quickly, the candidate then scores their summative assessment using the rubric. They analyze those results. How did my kids do? Great. Need help? Where do I need to continue the work? And they make a decision whether they're going to extend learning or reteach the learning. So that is all based off of that rubric data. And again, they are able to, in a video clip, respond and justify their extension or reteach, and then they film the extension or reteach lesson.
Oh, they do? They don't just say what they're gonna do.
Right.
They have to submit what they did do.
Yes. And that's always a sticking point for candidates. So when I would teach this, I would say, okay, everybody, there's these many videos. There's one in this last section. Don't go in, plan this awesome lesson, film everything, and then think, I will do this in 3 weeks when I have more time to write it up. Recognize that 3 weeks in between, you have to still do a follow-up, and follow-up 3 weeks later is not going to be very effective. So there has to be some timeliness to this and planning on the candidate's part.
So I'm just being a real teacher, classroom teacher. So I give all my summative assessment at the end, and I've got this massive range of students. I've got my focus students as well, which have a massive range of achievement. And I've got to reteach what I've just taught.
So what you'll do is you'll score whatever it is, and it could be a process, a product, or a presentation. So maybe your summative assessment, single subject social science teacher, is that the students build out some kind of a digital slide and they make a presentation. You can score them on the rubric while they're making the presentation, and you have one focus student that you will evaluate their work. And then you'll make a instructional decision based on the class and that focus student.
Okay.
So it's not, and the summative assessment will not be a 20-page paper. You can't teach that in 3 to 5 lessons. So it'll be, it needs to be more than a couple of words on a sticky note, right? So it needs to be a little bit more robust than that. I've seen candidates do like a 2-part assessment where there's multiple choice and there's short answer, and they use the rubric on the short answer and then score that and do follow-up and teach based on that. It looks different for everyone. And
Teaching that is problematic because I don't know how many teachers reteach. If I'm teaching a whole class, I don't know many teachers. If 3 or 4 kids did not do that well, they would go back and reteach the whole class because
to reteach the whole class.
they don't. They could just read
2 kids and
Okay.
it's students, very, very literally 2 kids.
Okay.
And so I could say, hey, I'm a 2nd grade teacher. I was teaching this. 98% of my kids got this. And so they are going to do this activity while I pull a small group and we're going to
submit that bit.
5 to 7 minutes of me reteaching. I just want to make sure you know this because we got to move on and let's keep going. Or extension activity. Fantastic work, everybody. We read those fables together. We came out with the message, moral, or theme. You wrote your own fable with the message, moral, or theme. Now we're going to turn that into a play. So let's put you in some groups. You're going to make a play about this message, moral, or theme. We're going to record it and we're going to send it home on Parent Square so your parents can see it. Right? That's an extension of the learning.
Sorry, for this cycle, they have to video the initial and this follow-up.
So they record 3 to 5 lessons that they plan. So 3 to 5 lessons in a series and a follow-up lesson.
And the follow-up, okay.
Yeah, they don't get extra credit for making 5 lessons. So I usually tell them, get it done in 3. Again, this is the evidence table. This is in your documents. This is for the literacy performance assessment. So same deal for single subject world language, asset-based, content-specific, and ELD goals. Assessment-driven instruction, right? Candidates are making decisions based on what kiddos can do. We're teaching basketball, we're teaching dribbling. Kids are not able to dribble. We're going to spend a little bit more time on that skill. We're not going to move on to what comes next. I'm not a PE teacher, my sister is. Deep learning of the content, right? We need to get deep into this stuff. We need to ask lots of questions, knowledge, skills, abilities of students in the follow-up instruction, right? We are doing some kind of an assessment. There is follow-up instruction. Maybe it's for a targeted few group. Maybe everybody did a great job. Maybe everybody missed something. So we are all working on that space. Pretty similar to what I just talked about. So again, the content-specific knowledge, skills, and ability goal, and then an ELD. So what we're going to do and how we're going to communicate about it. 3 to 5 lessons. Integrated ELD, learning of the content, monitoring and adjusting instruction, actionable feedback. That's where this one differs from the literacy performance assessment because they don't have those requirements for those themes, meaning making, foundational skills. That's not here. We're focusing on how they're integrating that ELD, how they're getting those kiddos into the content. Same deal here, summative assessment using that rubric, analyzing the results, reflecting on what they discovered about the group, and how effective their instruction was. Then, based on this, they reteach or they extend, video record. Here is a copy of the single subject world language evidence table. Again, what you'll see in your operational documents is a lot more complex than this because we're asking for more stuff at this time, but we are focusing it down, aligning it with the requirements of SB 488. And it's here, and I will make sure, like I said, to share this with you so you can take a look at this as well as the documents. When I go to the next slide, it's our email addresses. So that's all for me. Sorry about a lot of chitty chat. I did want to make sure that you had access to what is operational and then you know what's coming. So when you're making your recommendations, you're like, wait, that was something that's coming. So I don't necessarily need to think about that one. It's already being addressed. But there are other spaces and things that you have brought up that absolutely could support moving forward. And as we are thinking about this, and as you, if I were to open up my screen and you could see some of these assessment guides with about 1,000 track changes, right? We are very, very actively engaged in updating these documents, thinking about the candidate experience, what they have to do, what is it at the essence of what we're measuring, and how does an intern do it? How does a resident do it? How does a student teacher do it? How does an ECO candidate do it? A person who is challenging all their coursework and is rolled in an intern program and doing teacher performance assessments after doing EDS APK and such like. So there's all different scenarios for folks out there. And as you're looking at these, like I said, take a look. I'll show up this presentation so you have these evidence tables. And if there's any questions, please let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question about time and process.
The timing was aspirational. Would like to have everybody back in the main room just for some whole group share out. I'd like for that to start about 4:25. So that doesn't give a lot of time for reviewing. But at least a little bit of time to do some high level skimming maybe. And then if you could work together to put together a slide.
You should borrow my slides. I'll go ahead and stop sharing. But these are the email addresses. So if you do have candidates that are concerned, questions, they have a very specific question, please do. These get answered by real people that answer questions that we get them every day. So please provide them with this information.
So if you want to share that with me, then I will put it in the CalTPA folder.
Sure.
So sorry, and just logistically, Juliet, you're supposed to share a deck with one of us. Do you want to share that to my Gmail or to my work or to the CDC email?
Whichever one, if you just want to give me the email address. I'll walk over to. Okay. And then sorry, Tina, I cut you off.
Oh, no.
Just so I don't say it, but I know I'll get a stalker. I don't. I'm not.
It would be really interesting, but I don't know that we all have time to do it. No, completing a task. I'm curious what putting in the chat. It's gonna be fabulous.
Yeah.
I actually think that's a valuable. I think this is a big part of one of the recommendations that we need to consider.
Juliet, do you think there's any path to taking some time to engage in the task your way creatively? That's fine. We see a lot of value in taking the time to do the task. And we're wondering if there's an alternative or creative way that we can shift our time.
So, yeah, Tina, go ahead.
Or even, if we could, I'm very curious to see what, ChatGPT scoring a task looks like versus an assessment person scoring it. So even if you have somebody work. But
We
you could-
don't. In fact, that was the original goal, was to have you all engage in scoring. But we were unable to get samples.
I bet I can make a fake sample in like 7 seconds on chat. Yeah.
Yeah, that the whole protecting of children and their identities and candidates, bringing real samples into this space in a Bagley Keene, it would be really challenging to do so. Because all the released copies of the performance assessments that we have are in password protected files that go straight to faculty at this time. And so, like I said, I wouldn't want to put a video clip up here with kiddos and put someone's
have a
submission. So, yeah.
That's what I meant. There's no fake example that you all use for scoring, training, or anything.
We use real stuff for training. We use mid-range submissions from candidates. And again, because those are in very protected environments with scorers, we're able to do that. But in this environment, I mean, I could make something if we want, something like that. We could always do something like that. But it was also a challenge, like if everybody in this room was an English teacher, we could make an English one, but if I teach PE, I don't know what this looks like, right? So how many different examples could we make up? So that was part of the vision, but again, I'm a chitty chatter, and so I took up too much time.
No, I think there was a lot of really good conversation.
No, absolutely.
I guess the other part to this is, I don't know how much we can really understand in the next period, 2 more meetings that we're together, that a lot of our some of our recommendations at the very least will probably be, we recommend that a group of experts deep dive into this.
And you've had experience with that kind of process before, like you've seen that sort of play out, where a group like this is convened and it resulted in.
Yes, and then this is the first step. I mean, I hope, are going to be really innovating around the TPA. And so I think this work group is the first step at doing so. And then our recommendations can be, we recommend experts deep dive into this. We recommend they deep dive into that, and then bring it back to the commission.
Yeah, and for sure in the LPA, that's actually how I got my job here at the commission. I was on the work group and I started in March of 2022 to work with a group of experts. I was group of 35 to develop the literacy performance assessments. And so in getting to know those folks, they're like, hey, I think you might want a job. So that's how I shifted over. So there is a very strong work group that has been working around the LPA. And so that's why, Mary has said very clearly that we want to align these with the LPA, because we've seen a lot of great success in our field testing and in our pilot testing with some of these changes that we've made they seem small and simple, but it makes a difference when instead of having a 5-minute clip, you get to choose how long your clip is, right? Instead of having to do these annotations, like I think Ben was talking about a little bit earlier, of like the drop-down menu and typing in a box, and the drop-down menu where you can do a commentary, where it's just a template and you're just saying at minute 2, 10 seconds, this happened and this is why. And so it's just a template, right? So certain things like that are very, very well received in the pilot and are in field test right now. And we field tested the math performance assessment with PK3 and all the special education low incidence area, early childhood education, deaf and hard of hearing, visual impairments. And we're getting feedback from those folks, not just from surveys, having focus groups, talking to the candidates. What were your thoughts of this? How did this work? How can this go forward? So there is a lot of study along behind the LPA and the MPA that we are pulling over into the work. So these aren't just Marissa's ideas and arbitrary thoughts. They really are based in a lot of this work. And so it's wonderful when we see a recommendation come out of this group that we are doing already, because we're already aligned and we're already thinking alike, because that's what's coming in the future. And we know that there are issues with what we have right now.
So. Communicate. It's already done a complete outline of what I need to teach each day. It scored the lesson plan and made it better. And now it's writing my reflection for me.
If you want to share your screens.
Oh, yeah.
I don't, can I do like the wireless share with this?
You have to
Or
join the Zoom
Okay.
and then join this breakout room.
You guys promise not to laugh at my background.
That's why I made sure I'm like, I need to share just my thing, because
I try to join the Zoom, just because conversations out there, but I think
It is out there. So how did you do what you just did?
I talked to it. So my prompts, I said, could you please score this CalTPA?
Did you say please?
You say So Jen Wolf and I talk about this a lot. If you're nice to your chat, it gives you high quality results, and if you communicate with it in grammatically correct or what we identify as grammatically correct ways, it will think you're smarter and it will give you smarter answers. Because it's a computer adaptive conversation, there's a lot of problematic stuff. I wrote a paper, I will send it to you, about the idea that when we think about scoring with chat, because it's linguistically biased, it tends to criminalize particularly people of color, and it tends to not like women. So chat is kind of a racist misogynist because of the data set that it's built on, because it doesn't have thoughts. It's a large language model. That being said, I uploaded a lesson plan that I found on the internet that has ELD standards, because that's a big plot hole, or like a big hole. And I said, could you please score this lesson plan from the CalTPA rubric? And it said, I'm going to engaging and supporting students in learning, assessing student learning, using knowledge of students. I'm going to score all these things. And I said I'd like feedback to improve this lesson and understand if the lesson would earn a passing score. Based on the CalTPA expectations, this lesson plan is well structured and aligned with academic standards, making it likely to receive a passing score. However, to maximize its effectiveness and improve its score, here's a detailed evaluation based on key rubric areas, along with suggestions. I'll try to log in. Differentiation is evident. There should be more student choice. And it goes strengths, areas for improvement, suggested change. Strengths, area improvement. And like you would have to choose to do it and you'd have to teach it. But
what a resource.
it's and then I said, so here's you want to get your ick factor, because I don't know how we feel about this. They don't pay me any money. So so I said, can you please create an outline of how I would create an outline to complete cycle 1 of the CalTPA in English language arts with a calendar of when to teach lessons in film. Here's a structured outline and calendar, including lesson planning, filming, and submission steps. And it does it like what days we should do it, what day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then I asked it, can you write a sample reflection that would earn a passing score? You can use artificial data for students 1, 2, and 3. And it wrote high achieving learner, emergent bilingual learner, struggling learner. So they would probably just change out to educational specialists. You could teach it too. I'll use more graphic organizers. We need more small group discussions, and I'll offer more sentence frames and word banks. It's like differentiation bingo. They check the boxes. And it just keeps going. It did the whole TPA in about 5 minutes. It wasn't 5 minutes because I was chatting. So you can like process that however you want, but we did it. We did the thing you asked us to.
Let's shoot for being ready to share out in the whole group at 4:30. Just because I want us to have the opportunity to share out with everybody, just your thoughts on the model.
Recording in progress.
And then, we need to wrap this conversation up today. So, and I'm not keeping people past 5.
Are you the host in this one?
I don't think so. I think this computer
You'd
is,
be able to join without.
Oh, so I can share my screen.
Yeah. Yeah, because you set it so that.
I was just a guest in
I
and
should be
then,
able to, yeah.
yeah.
That you are.
What are you all seeing, you all working with student teachers at the moment?
You're there. You'll pop into the other rooms and let them know.
AI in their teaching.
I'm ignoring it. that it exists.
And the commission's putting it on the program and the programs are.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, Stanford just says if they do, if they can use whatever they want as long as they cite it.
Mhm.
So it would be the same for lesson plans. I suppose it would be the same with a reflection. I would hope it wouldn't be. I mean, lesson plan's great. I mean, that's no different to going to a textbook or some, Tolkien or whatever it is, that people have used for years. I mean, there's absolutely no difference for that.
But the reflection is disturbing.
The reflection is disturbing. Their ability to put in information. So with the 3 focal students, because that was my hope, was that it wouldn't be able to cope that well with focal students. Right, because it's no longer a single lesson plan. It's got these little, it's got Brian, Peter, and Mary in it. But what I worry about is that our students will think, teacher candidates will think that what comes out of there is the right answer for Peter, Mary, and not really think about them as individuals, rather than representing a million Marys. And that's what worries me about the process of it.
To me, showing them what ChatGPT can do or what any AI tool can do and saying, okay, yeah, this is what it can do. But there's a clip from The Simpsons. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where it's like all these kids and they're just like stacked up to the ceiling and it's a video. And he's like, this is your lesson coming from, and it was like Pepsi or something like that. And tell them, I said, is that what we want? Is that what's best for kids? Is this what the future of education is? Or is there still that human touch that needs to be in there? That how can that build a relationship? That I still have students that come to me that were in my 8th. I was teaching 2nd grade at one time, and the 2nd grade teacher told me there's a man waiting for you. And I was like, a man? And I was like, oh, that's Jonathan. He was one of my 8th graders and he needed a letter of recommendation in college to get into a program. He came and found me. That won't build that relationship. That won't manage that classroom. And it can only get you so far, right? And so recognizing that.
And then also the 3 that you read out, the accommodations that they listed are trite.
Yes.
I mean, they came across, if I was a scorer, I'd be looking at that and thinking that's just trite. That's just, you just come and you sprinkled some magic stuff in your lesson plan that's going to do it. You did one class on this and these 2 things, so you're going to do those.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Is there a place where this connects with our conversation about local scoring and how we score? Because if it's more personal, or if there's an element of like defense, so we can discuss what happened, you're not going to chat GPT. I mean, it's going to be apparent because we're doing work that's so complex. You could print out a thing, but exactly, it's like so superficial that you'll know immediately that this student has not, like teacher prep student, has not mastered the depth of what we're asking from teachers.
I don't think we can count on local scoring for that, because some programs are just so big that they might do some local scoring, but there are just places that can't. And we're not going to get that. That they know the student or they know their voice, or it's just, I don't think we can count on that.
Even the centralized scoring model, you can calibrate assessors in a different way. You can train these folks because, again, they're me. They are teachers of this subject matter
The
area.
next phase is we're not going to have scorers. We're going to have AI doing the scoring.
Oh, no.
Unless we make a rule that does not happen.
But I mean, you're gonna have scorers. If you're gonna have students who use AI to do a shortcut, you're gonna have scorers who do it
That's
too.
what I was absolutely pointing
You know,
out.
and so like on both ways, there has to be some firewall that I mean, because if students can do every part of the TPA through AI, including their reflections and their thoughts, then just get rid of the TPA because it's not demonstrating any competence except the ability to do what
Or just
Kate
get,
just did.
get rid of the way it is right now.
Yes, but somehow you need some firewall that ensures that, you know, the student is actually reflecting and thinking.
Yes,
They do have
They need
video.
video.
Lesson plan.
they have to teach the lesson.
Right.
And there's
But-
video of that.
We do care about the lesson plan to some degree.
Well, I mean, I don't
Be some discernment, right? So I think,
I don't mean we don't care about it, but I was referencing what Colin said about like you use a teacher's guide or you use online or you know, but the reflection, to me anyway, is the heart of a teacher, understanding what's happening. Are the students learning, knowing where to go next? That to me, that's the heart of it.
but maybe what we can measure is the discernment. Right, so if I'm using a calculator to get the answer, but I have to describe why I put in what I put in and why I either chose to. I don't know.
How do we firewall AI from that? Because I think they could ask AI to explain what this was and it would come up with something pretty plausible.
Well, I mean, it can be a stipulation that the state has that sponsors have to have in their writing that for these responses, you are not, it's not permitted to use AI. Which is like what Stanford has said that, you know, you have to cite AI, otherwise you're going against the honor code within Stanford or
Right.
whatever.
Right, and so if you, I mean, in some ways, an honor code rule about it is maybe all you can do.
I don't know. Just think about, that's why I asked you, what do you do with your student teachers in classrooms and what are teachers doing right now with AI? I suspect when you're talking with student teachers and candidates, you're asking them questions about their practice and you're looking at video together and you're saying, why did you make this decision? What did you do here? Where did you do there? Because you want to make sure they know what they're doing before they go out and work with kids. There's got to be some way that our assessment can demonstrate that they know what they're doing.
And so does that then also build into the embedded in the program?
Yeah.
Right.
Possibly. Well, that's also why I asked about step 4, how they submit what they say they're gonna do next. And I think a conversation between a teacher, educator and the candidate would be very, I don't know.
No, absolutely.
Better than them, the
Well-
AI is saying what they're gonna do next.
The CalTPA, the EdTPA, any TPA is one part of a credentialing program. It should be it's an important part, right? But it's also, there are 12 observations, there are conversations, there are a lot of coursework where all of these things, and so if you do have someone come to you and as their faculty who you can look at it, you're like, yeah, I've seen a lot of your work and this is not it, right? Then that conversation can happen at that program level if it's truly embedded and someone is working with candidates in that way. And so that will be what we want to aspire to and having folks have that level of conversation, like a dissertation chair and their candidate going back and forth and working with one another. And then also having candidates work with that cooperating teacher who oftentimes, especially as a student teacher or resident, they spend a lot of time with that person. And so that person can be another person, not so if you have a faculty member that has 50 candidates, how are they going to slice and dice it? But they all have a cooperating teacher that is working with them. They all have a faculty mentor that's supervising them in the field. So, yeah, so all those different people can be part of that conversation.
I'm definitely going to go back and rethink what we've been doing about the 12 observations, for example, because of the guidance about approved supports that you're allowed to give, we've always hedged away from a supervisor going and watching a lesson that they're going to be using for their EdTPA.
Oh.
Right? The reflection that they write for CalTPA will be influenced by my feedback. So we never used to send supervisors to those, but I'm thinking if we really want to embed it, then the supervisors should be there. They should be observing, and then we see the reflection that actually, well, yeah, this is the reflection on that lesson because I was in it as well.
Just supportive.
Yeah, and you can have that conversation about that, and that's the lesson that is part of their TPA, or part of their teacher performance assessment. And then it's hard to actually get someone else to write it, right? I can't say, I've just taught this lesson, can you write more reflection? Which is what they could say at the moment, and no one would know whether that was the lesson or not, unless it was the one that was videoed.
To me, I think that a person who goes to ChatGPT, there's a reason, right? They don't think that they're competent. They don't think that they
These
know.
letters that CTA submitted, those candidates would all do it because they all talked about this was exhausting, I couldn't do it, I didn't pass this time, and like they don't see this as something of value,
Right.
that doing it themselves is value. They just want to get through it. And they would go to that, because they just want to be done with it. And I think, in these groups, we all tend to be people from good programs who do like these ethical things about it. And I'm so cynical about there are mills out there that aren't going to do it that way, that are going to do the shortcuts, that somehow you can't just appeal to the honor code there has to be some sort of firewall about how it looks or how it doesn't look.
Well, or we completely redesign the performance assessment. So maybe it is like in a teacher education program where at the end of their student teaching or midway, you've got the cooperating teacher, the supervisor, the teacher candidate discussing a particular piece of lessons and kids and et cetera. And then whoever's in the room is making an assessment about, is this candidate on track and do they need to go on? When you're sitting in a dissertation committee, you're doing the same thing. I mean,
So is redesign the TPA could happen in a side group the way PACT was designed and FAST was designed with the existing standards. So it doesn't take the state or the CTC to say we could totally redesign the TPA. Some group, wonder who, could just do it now. They could redesign the TPA if it meets the standards and it addresses these issues in a better way. Then it's going to draw from CalTPA. It's going to draw from EdTPA. So I mean, I'm just saying it may or may not be sort of what this work group does of redesign the TPA. If the standards for it are still okay, then a redesigned TPA could emerge.
yeah.
And so are the standards okay? Do the standards provide enough of the guide rails that existing or new TPAs do that? The TPA approval standards, the ones that,
Performance assessment.
yeah, that's the design standards for it, that TPA and FAST and CalTPA had to meet to be approved. Are those design standards sufficient? Or do they have to be tweaked so that assessment models that meet the standards are different?
Well, given what we just, if we go back to what we're supposed to explore, is this a valid and authentic assessment? Thank you. Based on
So badly.
Kathleen demonstrated for us here, would you all say this is a valid and authentic assessment?
So I think there's like portions, filming your teaching practice, right now we can't deep fake that. I'm not saying that forever that's valid and authentic, but filming yourself teaching gives us a slice of your classroom from an objective outsider who's not that person who's also been feeding you and caring for you and knows your dog is sick. I think there is value to the validity of that. So I'm going to pause there and let you guys say what you think, because I have another thought, but what do you guys think?
What I was gonna say before about Tina's suggestion about the triad, that group of support coming together and discussing, that really closely aligns with what induction does. And, so that could be a way that we start to communicate between pre-service and beginning teaching. If we see like
Yeah.
it's beneficial here, how could we find a path here? Because that is what we want people to do, right? We want our teachers to be open to sharing their practice, reflecting with others, getting away from the closed door and the fear. To look at, I have a community to lean on and I can grow in my community. I think that's very useful and that is very difficult to fake, right? Obviously, every option is going to have a lot of barriers, but that when you said that made me think, well, that's what we do in induction.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Another I'm thinking of Japanese lesson studies, which we were able to do.
Yeah.
We sort of do that already. We have 3 and relatively new. We didn't used to do it when you were there, but we've started doing last year. We have 3 co-observations and debriefs now, 1 each quarter, where you sit with the CT and the teacher candidate and the supervisor,
Great.
and you come together about what they've seen and what we haven't seen, and one of the real benefits of that is that a candidate hears that there's different perspectives on their teaching from their supervisor, like me, or their CT. And it was really done not for that purpose, but to encourage CTs to take more of a role in the feedback process and to understand what we were looking for. But it actually had a much bigger benefit than we thought, because the candidates are getting this 2 sides of it coming in and talking.
And I don't think it's bad to, after I've had that conversation with my university supervisor, and the host teacher, to then reflect.
No.
Right? I don't think
Absolutely.
it's bad for me to integrate what you've brought
Yeah.
to my reflection.
Right, it's more input for you.
Engage in quarterly assessments?
Yeah, we have that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we have a version of that too. We have 3 times a year we have assessments. So I mean, I think this also gets to the question around it being duplicative, because we are already assessing candidates through our observations, through our, timely assessments through the year. We're giving them feedback, they're reflecting already. And then we're doing this assessment, but I do understand the value of it for sort of like comparative data that we can collect to sort of standardize what folks are getting. So I get it. And it does feel duplicative. And I think the work that we do locally is deeper. We're able to do that more authentic work that they can't really fake.
So could the outcome, oh, sorry.
Now I'm processing.
Go on.
Yeah. This is good stuff.
No, that's okay. So could the outcome be that in our recommendations for embedding and having more local input, the places that don't do what you're doing, like what you're doing counts for TPA. So it's not a layer on top of. And the people who haven't been doing that at all, now they've got to bring it.
Well, and I think we can use common, I think when we talk about what's valid and authentic, we talk about, are the tasks valid? Are these tasks you would do in teaching? I think all of us would say, yeah, we design lessons, we talk about our kit, like we figure stuff out. Then there's the process and the iterative process that you all are talking about, how it's embedded. And whether somebody is putting their stuff through AI, that's the process. That's where it can go awry in the end by 2 things. 1, the teacher not actually learning how to teach when engaging with the process, and 2, a demonstration of their teaching that isn't valid.
Right.
And then I'd say also the tasks, the rubrics we might also consider them valid and authentic, that they might be looking at the things we would want to see. So I think it's coming down to process. And I think you can have common tasks and rubrics that you use across programs. But we just need to have to think about the process of using them to ensure that candidates are learning how to teach and they're demonstrating that they know how to do it.
Because I think what I've experienced, when we were working together, but also where I am, is our candidates tend to be successful on the assessment because we've done all of this stuff anyway. So it feels a little duplicative, but at the same time, we're not experiencing it as huge a challenge as maybe somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because they're able to do it. I do think that in a 1-year program, maybe, depending on the intensity of the program, people tend to use or sort of lean on crutches or assistance. when they feel in a time pinch. And so, you know, I think that can come up in those instances, but
I'm
I
gonna
don't see people passing a TPA here or like not passing anything else.
Yeah.
You know, I don't see that.
See, but I think this is where Beverly was spot on with programs that know their candidates, you know, say, we didn't see it, you see something, but
Yeah.
we're gonna triangulate it. with
Yeah.
What they're doing, and I've heard plenty, we've heard so much evidence out there, the candidates did fine, they passed the program and they keep failing. In TPA or their.
I would say that some candidates, particularly world languages, and if English isn't their first,
That's a good one, yeah.
then that's where, no matter how much we've embedded all the support and thing, that's where we see that this person is a really good teacher, they've got great reviews from their supervisor and their CT, and they can't pass.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to respond to those sorts of prompts.
Right.
Because they haven't been brought into that sort of system. And that's hard.
Yeah.
So
We're supposed to be back in there in 2 minutes, so we're supposed to get a break too.
Because we're starting at 4:30.
We'll start at 4:30, but.
Yeah, you're right. Some people might need to. So what I'm hearing everyone say is that when we think about appropriate for credential candidates, and where they are, it is becoming maybe easier for them to access with the advent of new technologies that may or may not replace some of the critical thinking skills. There may be ways where the most appropriate parts could be coupled with adaptations that acknowledge that the new technology exists. So for example, you film and then you have to do a panel. Or you film and you have to engage in an oral reflection. So that it becomes less duplicative, less onerous for students who are clearly struggling with the writing portion. They're spending 36 hours on what could be a 20-minute conversation. And that it would still retain the value that exists in the process of showing you can do it. Did I get that right? How do I type that? I'm gonna do things.
So appreciative of you.
I don't want to get it wrong because I think it's important that the words are correct and you guys are so smart.
And well, I would say that's just an example too. I don't know what the best way of doing this is anymore.
We used to know in 2008. We knew what we were doing.
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm open to work. No, my boss might be watching.
No, when I did my credentialing program, right, I went to teach and I remember thinking to myself, man, I wish I could go back and take that class again. Because I had no idea what they were talking about.
I know.
Now I have something to connect it to. And so often the shift that I saw and the struggle that I saw was folks coming from being a passive student learner to being the teacher and understanding that we can't just do an assignment and knock it out and go to the next thing and never think about that class again, that it all builds on itself to actually being in the classroom. And that doesn't necessarily, that has something to do with the teacher performance assessment, but it has more to do with the shift from student to teacher. And it's a struggle. And how do you move that student through that process and get them ready to teach kids on day one? And then you also have those folks that are in there on original internship permits, short-term staff permits, internships, long-term subs, all these different scenarios. And how do you support them all?
We need a
I'm
bio.
going to say one last thing. I think the other thing this is bringing up for me is the need for the performance assessment to be very flexible and adaptable, at least an element of it. I think we way overbuilt what we have now. They're too big, they're too huge. There could be a piece that is standardized, and then there could be pieces that are adaptable to local contexts. But that would still retain reliability, scoring to some extent. I mean,
Does
there's
it have to be locally scored?
I don't know. I mean, I think this is where we need the expert groups to come in and say, but if we just provide the framework, look, it's gotta be more, some part of it's gotta be really flexible and adaptable to a program. Another part of it can be whatever we want it to be. And we have
I
to
think
be,
that's really important, that piece. I mean, when we go back to CalTPA being, like, moving from PAC to CalTPA, it was, and I don't want to blame him, Ray Pashone, right, who is a statistician.
Remember his name.
He's famous, but he's a statistician. So he wants to see valid reliability in a different way than we talk about being valid and reliable. He sees it from a statistician point of view, so you have to have standardization. You can't have people giving feedback because you're giving, I don't know how much feedback you're going to give. And so it's with the standardization because we're giving feedback to people. Okay, so we're not really measuring what they can do, we're measuring their ability to respond to your feedback. Right, and so that was the thing. So we have to be careful when we say, you know, I mean, we have to remember that it becomes non-standard if we do.
not really. Again, if the process.
I'm not worried about being non-standard though.
Yeah, but I just meant you can still use the same kinds of products and rubrics to say they demonstrate they can do it. I mean, that's again what Lee Shulman is like at the end of a dissertation process, the candidate should be really different than they were from the beginning. And that's what we want. And I think that's what we want with this process too, ideally. So now it's okay that they get lots of help and support. They're gonna be better teachers.
And with CalTPA, it's always been okay. It's all we should do.
Go to the restroom.
Thing that I always wonder about is, I mean, with all of this.
I hope I
what
captured
happens when you do anything that comes?